India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Berlin today, where he's meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. While the focus of Modi's visit is on trade and energy partnerships, the war in Ukraine is overshadowing the meeting. India, which imports much of its military hardware from Russia, is trying to walk a diplomatic tightrope between Moscow and the West. Modi has so far refused to condemn the Russian invasion or to impose sanctions on Russia, straining India's relationship with the EU.
Minister of India,
Days ago in Delhi, Prime Minister Narendra Modi opens India's flagship global forum, the Raisina Dialogue. Guest of honor, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission. Her message: Europe and India must grow closer together.
For the European Union, strengthening and energizing its partnership with India is a priority in this upcoming decade. And therefore, I am very pleased that today Prime Minister Modi and I have agreed to establish an EU-India Trade and Technology Council to tackle key trade, economic and technological challenges.
But the war raging thousands of kilometers away in Ukraine is casting a shadow on Europe's ties with India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has not condemned the Russian invasion. He's trying not to risk India's traditionally close ties with Russia. Von der Leyen spoke emotionally of her own visit to Ukraine, where she witnessed the mass graves of Bucha, and she insisted that India could not look away.
The outcome of the war will not only determine the future of Europe, but also deeply affect the Indo-Pacific region and the rest of the world. For the Indo-Pacific region, it is as important as for Europe that borders are respected and that spheres of influence are rejected.
But for India's foreign minister, some of this message rings hollow.
We've been hearing for the last 2 months a lot of arguments from Europe, saying, there are things happening in Europe and Asia should worry about it because these could happen in Asia. Guess what? Things have been happening in Asia for the last 10 years.
A prime example for Indian critics of Europe, the chaotic Western withdrawal last year from Afghanistan, raising questions over the West's commitment to the region and to its values.
Now let's bring in DW's chief international editor Richard Walker is here in Berlin and DW correspondent Manira Chowdhury in Delhi. Richard, let's start with you. How is Scholz trying to bind India closer to the West?
Yeah, well, Gerhard, we saw some examples of what's going on in the relationship between Europe as a whole and India in the report just there from Delhi last week, with Ursula von der Leyen announcing this big tech and trade council to boost kind of discussions between the two sides, coordination between the two sides on the crucial areas of technology and trade and the ways that they intersect. And you have similar kind of discussions going on here with Germany, also setting up various different types of agreements to try to increase the engagement with India. Because what you have here in Germany and Europe as a whole is a recognition of the importance of India, a growing recognition of the importance of India strategically in the region being discussed as the Indo-Pacific these days, not so much Asia-Pacific, but with India very much in the heart of that. And that is not just because India is rising, it's been rising for years, but it's also because of a growing recognition of the challenge that China is presenting across that region, and a sense that trying to bind India closer to the West is a crucial way of trying to stand up to that challenge.
Let's go to Manira in Delhi there. Manira, how do people in India react to the war in Ukraine? What's public opinion like? Is it behind Modi and his policies?
Well, when it comes to the diplomatic response of India, we all know what it's been like over the past 2 months since the invasion began. The diplomatic response by the Indian government has also evolved, but is still far away from openly condemning the invasion. When it comes internally to the public opinion, well, there are both sides. There are both sets of people. There are both sets of responses. There are those people who are supporting Russia, who are saying, well, what's happening with the Ukrainians is unfortunate. But they are supportive of Russia, saying that what they call the Western supremacy in a way needs to be challenged, and what Russia is doing is well within its rights to do so. But at the same time, there is a very vocal lobby of public here in India who are very vocally and openly critical of the invasion, and not only of the invasion, but of the Indian government's diplomatic response, saying that there's no need to walk the tightrope that India has been doing.
So, public opinion being one thing, Manira, what about the business interests there? Are Indian companies willing to join the West in moving away from Russia economically, or do they now see a chance to establish a foothold in the Russian market?
Well, if we talk about the responses from the business industries, of course, it has not been as enthusiastic in severing its ties as we can see in the West. Although two big companies have announced shutting their business with Russia, one of them is Infosys, which is a software giant. The other is an Indian multinational steel-making company called Tata Steel. Both of them have joined a handful of Indian companies who have announced severing of ties with Russia. But as you just said, this is also opening up an opportunity for other Indian companies to, as you said, gaining a foothold in the Russian market and basically taking advantage of the vacuum that has been created as other global companies are making their way out of Russia. So that, of course, is happening, but that, of course, is not an easy proposition. And at the same time, after being shunned by the US and the European Union, there is a supply hit in Russia as well, and it is looking towards India to basically match some of those supply hits, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals and textiles and agriculture.
Richard Walker, international correspondent, back in here in Berlin. We've heard that the Indian-European relations are under strain right now. Do you think this visit will help to bridge the rift, if you will?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's not necessarily something that we can talk of as a massive rift, because you're not going to hear a huge amount of really open criticism from the German side of India. I think you see both the Europeans and the Americans being very cautious in criticizing India. We just heard in the report there, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, what his response was when he talked about, well, guess what, things have been going on in Asia in recent years. Europe perhaps wasn't as interested in us then as it should have been. But certainly, you hear a lot from German politicians of trying to sort of pull India in rather than push it away, to try to draw it into closer ties with the West through all of these agreements and try to kind of coax it in a direction that they would like to see. But there is one other elephant in the room here, and that is the current political situation within India. Manira can, of course, talk more about that, but there is a sense, and I was in India last week reporting, there's a sense of a really agitated environment in India's society. Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government is accused of trampling on the rights of the Muslim minority there. There have been incidents of hate, demolitions of Muslim homes and businesses, a really quite febrile atmosphere. And this is another thing which is certainly causing concern in Germany, that they want to cooperate with a democratic India, but they're worrying about what direction democratic India is actually taking.
DW's Chief International Editor Richard Walker there, and our correspondent Maria Chowdhury in Delhi. Thank you both.
Germany is one of India's top 10 global trading partners. More than 1,700 German companies are present there, accounting for about 400,000 jobs in the Indian labor market.
I'm joined now by Amrita Narlikar. She's president of the Giga Institute in Hamburg. Amrita, thank you for joining us. You've written that the EU and India are natural allies, and yet trade relations between the two have been difficult in recent years. Why is that?
Hi, Stephen. Great to see you. So, yes, what I've written is that the EU and India are, even though they should be natural allies, they are involved in a rather clumsy tangle. And there are several reasons for this. A big one is that the EU tends to place a lot of emphasis on business and development relations with India. And these are issues that India, too, is interested in promoting, especially under the business and growth-oriented Modi government. But the EU then very swiftly goes down a cul-de-sac of the narrowly defined values of social and environmental standards whenever the FTA is discussed. And the tone of these discussions can come across as if the Europeans are preaching to their Indian counterparts on the importance of liberal values. And neither the content nor the tone of these discussions are useful for winning trust, especially when negotiating with an ancient civilization like India.
Well, to play devil's advocate here, these big trade packages are very complicated to get approved by all the countries in the EU, and there often is a focus on social and environmental the practices of the trade partner. Isn't it likely that countries like France, like Germany, like Belgium are going to look at those issues when it comes to a trade package with India, and that could be a problem, to do one of these overarching packages?
Well, what I would emphasize is that the overarching packages are important and needed. The notion of values, however, needs to be expanded to include environmental standards, social standards, but also think about geostrategic questions, questions of security, and macro level values, which include democracy, liberalism, pluralism. These are all values that India shares with the European Union. The problem is that trade is regarded quite narrowly by the EU, by the Commission. And that is why we get this emphasis much more on the narrower labor and environmental standards, rather than bigger questions of democracy, pluralism.
In this sense, is it likely that the war in Ukraine will complicate things between the two sides, or could it actually represent an opportunity?
If the war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine could be a really important trigger for deepening the cooperation between EU and India, and also Germany and India. So on the one hand, the EU could keep trying to point the finger at India for not taking a strong stance in favor of democratic Ukraine. And this will not help EU-India or Indo-German cooperation. But in fact, what the war has shown Germany and Europe is the risks of overdependence on Russia. India also has a difficult neighbor in its region, China. And let's not forget the no limits partnership announced by Russia and China earlier this year. So there is an authoritarian advance happening on the borders of the EU and happening on the borders of India. And so this is an amazingly important opportunity and necessity for both India and Germany to be building secure supply chains, for EU and India to be building secure supply chains, especially in strategically important sectors like 5G technology, medical supplies, infrastructure, and also dual-use technology.
All right. Amrita Narlikar is president of the Giga Institute in Hamburg, talking about India-EU trade relations. Amrita, thank you very much.